Hello there, and welcome. Welcome to this quiet, gentle journey through time. I'm glad you're here tonight. Whether you're settling into bed, resting on the couch, or simply lying somewhere comfortable, I want you to know that there is nothing you need to do right now. Nothing at all. Just breathe. Let your shoulders relax. Let your body feel heavy and warm. And let your mind drift slowly, gently, back through the years. Tonight, we're going to travel together. We're going to travel far from the noise of our modern world, far from the screens and the schedules, far from the hum of traffic and the buzz of notifications. We're going to go back, way back, back to a time when life moved at the pace of the sun, when the day began with birdsong and ended with firelight, when the world was measured not in hours and minutes, but in seasons and harvests. We're going to visit America in the year 1850, and not the America of grand cities or political debates or railroad barons. No. Tonight, we're going to visit a farm, a quiet, ordinary, beautiful farm somewhere in the rolling countryside. Maybe it's in Ohio, maybe it's in Indiana or Illinois, maybe it's in Pennsylvania or Virginia. The exact place doesn't matter so much. What matters is the feeling, the gentle, unhurried rhythm of life on the land. In 1850, America was a nation of farmers. More than half of all the people in the country lived and worked on farms. These were not wealthy plantation owners or famous frontiersmen. They were ordinary families, husbands and wives and children, grandparents and neighbours. People who worked hard every single day, not for fame or glory, but simply to feed their families and care for their land. Their lives were simple and they were demanding, but there was also a deep, steady beauty in them, a beauty that we sometimes forget in our fast-paced modern world. Tonight, I want us to remember that beauty. I want us to step into the shoes of those people just for a little while and see the world the way they saw it. So close your eyes if you'd like, take a slow, deep breath, and imagine. Imagine a small farmhouse sitting at the edge of a wide open field. The sky above is dark, still full of stars. The air is cool and fresh. Somewhere a rooster is beginning to stir, and a new day is about to begin. Let's go there now, together, slowly, quietly. Let's walk through this day from the very first light of morning to the very last ember of the evening fire. Let's take our time. There's no rush, there never is in a story like this. It is dark, very dark, the kind of dark that you rarely see anymore, unless you've been far out in the countryside, away from any town or city lights. In 1850, there were no electric lights, no street lamps, no glowing signs. When the sun went down, the world became truly dark. And at this hour, somewhere around 4:30 in the morning, the darkness is still deep and complete. But the farm is not quite silent. If you listen very carefully, you can hear things, small things, quiet things. The soft rustle of wind through the trees, the distant call of an owl somewhere out in the woods beyond the fields, the gentle creak of the wooden farmhouse as it shifts and settles in the cool night air, and beneath it all, the steady, rhythmic breathing of a family asleep. Let us step inside the farmhouse now, gently, quietly, so as not to disturb anyone. The front door is made of thick, solid wood, and it sits slightly crooked in its frame. The latch is a simple iron hook. Inside, the air is cool but not cold. The last warmth from last night's fire still lingers, just barely, in the main room. This house is small. By our standards today, it would feel very small indeed. It has maybe 3 rooms, perhaps 4. The main room serves as the kitchen, the dining area, and the living space all at once. There is a large stone fireplace along one wall, blackened with years of soot. A few iron pots hang from hooks near the hearth. A rough-hewn wooden table sits in the centre of the room, surrounded by simple chairs and a bench. The floor is made of wide wooden planks, worn smooth by years of footsteps. Along the walls, you might see a few shelves holding jars and crocks, some tin cups, a few ceramic plates. There is a butter churn in the corner, a spinning wheel near the window, a rifle hanging above the fireplace mantel, and maybe a small framed sampler stitched by a daughter's careful hands. The words on it might say something like, "God bless this home," or "Love one another." The windows are small, and they have no glass in many farmhouses of this era. Instead, they might be covered with oiled paper or simple wooden shutters. Glass windows were a luxury, something that wealthier families had. For many farming families in 1850, the windows were simply openings in the wall, covered at night and in bad weather, opened during the warm days to let in air and light. Off the main room, there might be a small bedroom where the farmer and his wife sleep. The bed is a simple wooden frame, perhaps with ropes or slats to hold up a mattress. And the mattress itself is not like the ones we know today. It is a large cloth sack, stuffed with straw or corn husks. If the family is a bit more prosperous, they might have a feather mattress, or at least a feather tick laid on top of the straw. The pillows are similar, filled with feathers or sometimes dried grasses. The blankets are homemade quilts, pieced together from scraps of old clothing and fabric. These quilts are not just functional, they are works of art in their own way, each one carrying the colours and patterns of the family's life. A piece of a daughter's outgrown dress here, a scrap from a worn-out shirt there. Each patch tells a tiny story, though no one thinks of it that way. To the family, it is simply their quilt, their warmth on a cold night. Upstairs, in a loft space under the roof, the children sleep. There might be 3 of them, or 4, or 5. Families were large in 1850. Children were not only loved, they were needed. Every pair of hands mattered on a farm. Even the youngest child had chores to do, small tasks that helped keep the household running. The children sleep together, often sharing a bed or a pallet on the floor. They are tangled together under their own quilts, small bodies warm against each other. A rag doll lies near one child's hand. A pair of small leather boots sits at the foot of the bed, waiting for the morning. Now, in the darkness of this early hour, everyone is still sleeping. The world outside is still and calm. The stars overhead are brilliant, scattered across the sky in numbers that are hard to imagine if you've only ever seen the sky from a city. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a soft, glowing ribbon. The moon, perhaps a thin crescent, hangs low on the horizon, casting just the faintest silver light across the fields. And then, slowly, very slowly, something begins to change. It is not something you can see at first. It is something you can feel. A subtle shift in the air. A faint lightening of the darkness along the eastern horizon. Not sunrise, not yet, but the very first hint, the very earliest whisper that the sun is on its way. And with that whisper, the farmer stirs. His name, let us say, is Thomas. Thomas is a man of about 35 years. His face is tanned and lined from years of working in the sun. His hands are rough and calloused, the hands of a man who has spent his life gripping plough handles and pitchforks and axes. He is not a tall man, but he is strong. Farm life does that. It makes you strong in ways that no gymnasium could replicate. Thomas does not need an alarm clock. His body knows the rhythms of the day by heart. He has been waking at this hour since he was a boy, since his own father woke him before dawn to help with the morning chores. It is not something he thinks about. It is simply part of him, as natural as breathing. He lies still for a moment, listening. He can hear his wife, Mary, breathing softly beside him. He can hear the faint sounds of the house settling. And then, with a quiet grunt, he swings his legs over the side of the bed and sits up. The air in the room is cool on his skin. He reaches for his shirt, which is draped over the back of a chair, and pulls it on. Then his trousers, his suspenders, his thick wool socks. His boots are by the door. He will put them on in a moment. First, he makes his way to the fireplace in the main room. He kneels down and stirs the ashes with a poker. looking for any live embers from last night's fire. Often, he finds them, glowing faintly orange beneath the grey ash. He blows on them gently, coaxing them back to life, and adds a few small pieces of kindling. Dry bark, thin sticks, a handful of wood shavings. The embers catch, and a small flame flickers to life. He adds larger pieces of wood, building the fire carefully, patiently. Within a few minutes, the fire is burning steadily, and the room begins to warm. This fire is everything. It is heat, it is light. It is the means by which food will be cooked and water will be heated. In a farmhouse in 1850, the fireplace is the heart of the home, in every sense of the word. Some homes by this time have a cast iron cook stove, a wonderful invention that made cooking easier and more efficient. If Thomas and Mary have one, it sits near the fireplace, a heavy black iron box with flat surfaces on top for pots and pans and an oven space inside for baking. The stovepipe runs up through the ceiling and out the roof, carrying away the smoke. Whether it is an open hearth or a cook stove, Thomas gets the fire going, and then he pulls on his boots and steps outside. The air hits him like a gentle wave. It is cool, fresh, slightly damp with dew. The sky is a deep, dark blue now, lighter along the eastern edge. The stars are beginning to fade, one by one, like candles being quietly snuffed out. The farmyard is quiet but not empty. He can hear the animals stirring, the soft lowing of the cow in the barn, the shuffling of the horses in their stalls, the quiet clucking of the chickens in their coop beginning to wake. Thomas stands on the porch for a moment, just breathing, just looking out over his land. This is his farm, his piece of the world. He owns it. Perhaps 80 acres, perhaps 160. He may have bought it with savings, or received it through a government land grant, or inherited it from his father. Whatever the case, it is his, and he takes a quiet, deep pride in that. In the distance, he can see the outlines of his fields. The corn is tall at this time of year, if it is late summer, row upon row of green stalks, standing straight and proud in the dim light. Beyond the cornfield, there is a field of wheat, or perhaps oats, and beyond that, the dark line of the forest, where Thomas sometimes hunts for deer and wild turkey, and where he cuts his firewood in the autumn. He takes one more breath and then walks down the porch steps, his boots crunching softly on the packed earth of the yard. It is time to begin the morning chores. And so the day begins, not with a rush, not with an alarm blaring or a phone buzzing, but with the soft light of a growing dawn and the quiet footsteps of a man walking toward his barn. Let us walk with him, slowly. There's no hurry. The barn stands about 50 yards from the house. It is a large structure, the biggest building on the farm, bigger even than the house itself. It is built of heavy timber, rough sawn from logs that Thomas and his neighbours cut and hauled from the nearby forest. The walls are made of wide vertical boards, and the roof is steeply pitched, covered with wooden shingles. Over the years, the wood has weathered to a soft silvery grey. In some parts of the country, barns were painted red, using a mixture of linseed oil, milk, lime, and iron oxide, which was cheap and plentiful. Perhaps Thomas's barn has that familiar red colour, or perhaps it is simply the natural grey of aged wood. The barn door is wide, designed to allow a horse and wagon to pass through. Thomas lifts the heavy wooden latch and pulls the door open. It swings on iron hinges with a slow, low creak, and immediately the warm, rich smell of the barn flows out to meet him. Oh, that smell! If you've ever been in a barn, you know it. It is a complex, earthy, deeply organic smell. Hay and straw, warm animal bodies, leather and iron, manure and dust. It is not an unpleasant smell, not at all. It is the smell of life, of work, of the partnership between human beings and the animals that help sustain them. Inside, the barn is dim, lit only by the faint light coming through the open door and a few cracks between the boards. But Thomas knows this space as well as he knows his own hands. He moves through it easily, confidently. The first task of the morning, the very first thing, is milking the cow. Or cows, if the family has more than one. Most small farms in 1850 had at least one milk cow, and some had two or three. Thomas's cow is a sturdy, gentle creature, brown and white, standing in her stall, chewing her cud. She turns her big dark eyes toward Thomas as he approaches. She knows him. She knows his voice, his touch, his presence. She has been waiting for him. Thomas speaks to her softly. "Good morning, old girl," something like that. Farmers talked to their animals. It was natural. These animals were not pets exactly, but they were more than just livestock. They were companions of a sort, partners in the great work of keeping a farm running. A good milk cow was worth a great deal, and she was treated with care and respect. Thomas picks up a wooden stool, a simple three-legged stool, and sets it beside the cow. He sits down and places a wooden bucket beneath her. Then he begins to milk. His hands are practiced, his movements rhythmic. He grasps the teats firmly but gently, squeezing from top to bottom in a smooth, steady motion. The milk comes in thin, hissing streams, hitting the bottom of the bucket with a sharp, ringing sound. Ping, ping, ping. As the bucket fills, the sound changes, becoming softer, more muffled, as the streams of milk land in the growing pool of warm, frothy liquid. Milking takes time. Perhaps 15 or 20 minutes for one cow. It is repetitive work, but there is a calm rhythm to it, almost meditative. The cow stands quietly, occasionally shifting her weight from one hoof to another. Thomas leans his head against her warm side. The barn is quiet except for the sound of the milk and the occasional rustle of hay. When the milking is done, Thomas carries the bucket to the house and sets it on the porch or just inside the door. Mary will deal with it later, straining the milk through cheesecloth to remove any bits of hay or dust, and then setting some aside for drinking and cooking. The rest will be used to make butter or cheese, two essential staples of the farm family's diet. But there is more to do in the barn. Much more. Thomas goes back and feeds the horses. He has 2 horses, both strong draft animals, bred for pulling ploughs and wagons. They are not sleek, elegant riding horses. They are broad and thick-bodied with heavy legs and wide, flat hooves. They are named perhaps Buck and Sam or Dolly and Jack. Every farmer named his horses. They were valuable, far more so than any other animal on the farm. A good pair of horses cost as much as the farm's entire crop for a year. They were treated accordingly. Thomas measures out grain from the feed bin. Oats, most likely, or sometimes corn. He pours it into the wooden feed troughs in each stall. The horses eat eagerly, their big, soft lips scooping up the grain, crunching it loudly. Thomas fills their water buckets from the well or the barn's cistern. He checks their hooves, running his hand down each leg, feeling for heat or swelling. He brushes their coats with a stiff bristled brush, working out the tangles and the dust. A well-cared-for horse is a healthy horse, and a healthy horse can work all day without tiring too quickly. Next come the hogs. Most farms kept a few pigs. They were easy to feed because pigs will eat almost anything. Kitchen scraps, spoiled vegetables, whey from cheese making, windfall apples, acorns gathered from the forest floor. Pigs are remarkably efficient at turning waste into meat. Thomas keeps his hogs in a pen behind the barn, a sturdy enclosure made of split-rail fencing. He dumps a bucket of slop into their trough, and the hogs crowd around, grunting and snuffling, pushing each other aside in their eagerness. Thomas stands and watches them for a moment, perhaps counting them, perhaps noting which ones are growing well and which might be ready for slaughtering come autumn. Then the chickens. The chicken coop is a small, low building near the barn, with a fenced yard where the birds can scratch and peck during the day. Thomas opens the coop door, and the chickens come tumbling out, clucking and fluttering, eager to start their day. He scatters a handful of cracked corn on the ground for them, and they peck at it enthusiastically, their heads bobbing up and down in that quick, jerky way that chickens have. While the chickens are out, Thomas reaches into the nesting boxes inside the coop and collects the eggs. There might be 6 or 8 or 10, depending on how many hens he has and the time of year. The eggs are warm in his hand, smooth and brown or white. He places them carefully in a basket lined with straw. These eggs will be part of breakfast, and any extras can be traded at the general store in town or given to neighbours. Some farms also had sheep, or goats, or geese, or ducks. Each animal had its own needs, its own feeding schedule, its own quirks and habits. A farm in 1850 was a complex living system with every part connected to every other part. The animals provided food, milk, eggs, meat. They provided labour, pulling ploughs and wagons. They provided raw materials, wool from sheep, leather from cattle hides, feathers from geese, and in return, the farmer provided them with food, shelter, and care. By the time Thomas has finished the morning chores, the sky has changed dramatically. The eastern horizon is ablaze with colour, deep orange and soft pink and pale gold, spreading upward into a sky that is now a clear, luminous blue. The sun has not quite risen above the tree line, but it is close. The world is waking up. Birds are singing from every tree and fence post. A light mist is rising from the fields, catching the early light and glowing like a soft golden veil. Thomas walks back toward the house. His boots are muddy. His hands smell of hay and milk and animal. He is hungry, and as he approaches the house, he can smell something wonderful. Breakfast. Let us go inside and see what Mary has been preparing. As the morning light begins to fill the farmyard, let us step through the doorway of the house and into the warmth of the kitchen. Something good is cooking. You can smell it before you see it, and that smell, warm and rich and comforting, is one of the most welcoming things in the world. Mary has been up almost as long as Thomas. In fact, in many farm families, the wife rose at the same time as the husband, or only a few minutes later. Her morning began the moment Thomas rekindled the fire. As soon as the flames were going, she was up, wrapping herself in a shawl, tying on her apron, pulling her hair back and pinning it up. There was no time for lingering in bed. The day was already half started, and there was so much to do. Mary is, let us imagine, about 30 years old. She is a sturdy woman with strong arms and capable hands. Her face is pleasant and kind, with a few lines around her eyes from squinting in the sun. Her dress is simple, a plain cotton or linen gown in a muted colour, maybe dark blue or brown, that reaches to her ankles. Over it she wears a large apron which will stay on for most of the day, protecting her dress from the inevitable splashes and spills of kitchen work. The kitchen, as we have already seen, is the main room of the house. It is where everything happens: cooking, eating, sitting, talking, mending, reading, praying. It is the centre of family life, and right now it is busy. Mary has set the cast iron skillet on the stove or over the fire. She has sliced thick pieces of salt pork or bacon, and they are sizzling in the pan, the fat rendering down and filling the room with a rich, savoury aroma. Salt pork was a staple of the American farm diet. It was pork that had been heavily salted and stored in barrels, a method of preservation that allowed meat to last for months without refrigeration. It was fatty and salty and deeply flavourful. While the pork cooks, Mary cracks several eggs into the hot fat, and they begin to fry, the whites turning opaque and the yolks staying golden. She moves them around with a wooden spatula, careful not to break them. On the back of the stove, a pot of cornmeal mush is bubbling. Cornmeal mush, sometimes called porridge or simply mush, was one of the most common breakfast foods in rural America. It was made by slowly stirring cornmeal into boiling water with a bit of salt until it thickened into a warm, soft, porridge-like consistency. It could be eaten plain or with a bit of milk poured over it, or sweetened with molasses or maple syrup. It was simple, filling, and inexpensive. Some mornings, instead of mush, Mary might make johnny cakes, which are small flat cakes made from cornmeal batter, cooked on a griddle or in a skillet. They are golden and crispy on the outside, warm and soft on the inside. Or she might make biscuits, simple, fluffy biscuits made from flour, lard, buttermilk, and a bit of baking soda. These would be baked in the oven of the cook stove, and they would come out golden brown and steaming, ready to be split open and spread with butter. Butter, of course, was homemade. Mary churned it herself, using the cream that she skimmed from the top of the milk. The churning process was long and repetitive, turning the dasher up and down in the tall wooden churn until the fat in the cream separated and clumped together into butter. It could take 30 minutes or more. It was one of those tasks that was often given to the children because it required endurance but not much skill. A child could sit on the porch and churn butter while watching the younger ones play. The butter that Mary makes is rich and yellow, with a deep, creamy flavour that is nothing like the mass-produced butter we buy in stores today. She shapes it into a round pat using wooden butter paddles, pressing it firmly to squeeze out the remaining buttermilk. Sometimes she uses a butter mould, a small wooden press with a decorative pattern carved into it, perhaps a flower or a sheaf of wheat that imprints a pretty design on the top of the butter. For drinking, there is milk, fresh from this morning's milking, still slightly warm. Or there is water, drawn from the well. And there is coffee. By 1850, coffee had become a common drink, even on remote farms. It was one of the few things that the farmer could not produce himself and had to buy from the general store. The beans came in a large burlap sack, already roasted but not yet ground. Each morning, Mary would grind a handful of beans in a small hand-cranked coffee grinder, a wooden or iron box with a crank on top, and a small drawer on the bottom to catch the grounds. Then she would boil the grounds in a pot of water on the stove, making a strong, dark, slightly bitter brew. It was not the sophisticated coffee that we might enjoy today, with its carefully calibrated temperatures and precise brewing methods. It was rough and strong and simple, but it was hot and it was comforting, and it was the way that farm families had started their mornings for decades. Some families preferred tea, especially in the eastern states, where the tradition of tea drinking had lingered since colonial times. But coffee was becoming the American drink of choice, and on most farms it was the beverage of the morning. Now the children are awake. You can hear them upstairs, the creak of floorboards, the murmur of voices, the shuffling of small feet. They come down the ladder or the narrow staircase, one by one, rubbing their eyes, their hair tousled, their feet bare on the cool wooden floor. Let us say there are 4 children. The oldest is a boy of 12, named James. Then a girl of 10, named Sarah. Then another boy of 7, named William, whom everyone calls Will. And the youngest, a girl of 4, named little Emma. The children know their morning routine by heart. James, being the oldest boy, has already been helping with the barn chores since he was 8 years old. He may have gone out with his father earlier, or he may go out after breakfast to finish up whatever tasks remain. Sarah helps her mother in the kitchen, and she is already setting the table, laying out the tin plates and cups and forks. Will is supposed to be getting dressed, but he is dawdling, as 7-year-olds do, distracted by a spider on the window ledge. And little Emma is clinging to her mother's skirt, still half asleep, her thumb in her mouth. Mary gently tells Will to hurry up and get his boots on. She lifts Emma onto a chair and gives her a piece of biscuit to nibble on. She checks the pork, flips the eggs, stirs the mush. Everything is moving smoothly, with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has cooked this same breakfast 1,000 times before. Thomas comes in from outside, bringing with him the fresh, cool smell of the morning air and the barnyard. He washes his hands in a basin of water near the door, drying them on a rough towel. Then he sits down at the head of the table. The family gathers. Grace is said. In 1850, most farm families were deeply religious, and no meal began without a prayer of thanks. Thomas bows his head and says the words, perhaps a simple familiar prayer that has been passed down through generations of his family. Thank you, Lord, for this food and for the hands that prepared it. Bless this family and keep us in your care. Amen. And then they eat. Breakfast is not a rushed affair, but it is not a leisurely one either. There is too much work to be done. The family eats with quiet purpose, fueling their bodies for the long day ahead. The food is plain but hearty. Fried salt pork, eggs, cornmeal mush with a drizzle of molasses, biscuits with butter, coffee for the adults, milk for the children. It is the kind of meal that sticks with you, that gives you the energy to work hard for hours in the fields. The conversation at the table is simple. Thomas might mention the weather, which is perhaps the single most important topic on any farm. The weather determines everything. When to plant, when to harvest, whether the crops will thrive or fail. A farmer in 1850 watched the sky the way we watch the news. Thomas notes that it looks like a fair day, clear skies, no sign of rain. That is good. There is work in the fields that needs a dry day. Mary mentions that they are running low on flour and sugar, and perhaps someone should go to the general store in town soon. Sarah asks if she can go along if they make the trip. James says nothing much because he is 12, and 12-year-old boys are not always great conversationalists at breakfast. Will is busy pushing his mush around his plate with his spoon. Emma is making a small mountain out of her biscuit crumbs. It is a quiet, ordinary, unremarkable meal. And yet there is something deeply beautiful about it. A family gathered together at the start of a new day, sharing food that they grew and prepared with their own hands, in a home that they built with their own labour. There is a simplicity to it, a groundedness that speaks to something very deep in the human heart. After breakfast, the plates are cleared. Mary and Sarah wash the dishes in a large basin of hot water heated on the stove. The dishes are simple, tin or earthenware, sturdy and practical. They are washed quickly and set aside to dry. The leftover food is not wasted. Any scraps go to the hog bucket, a pail kept near the kitchen door where all the food waste is collected to be fed to the pigs later. Nothing is thrown away on a farm. Everything has a use. The morning is fully underway now. The sun is above the tree line, casting long, warm shadows across the fields. The dew is beginning to evaporate from the grass, and the world is bright and clear and full of the sounds of a farm coming to life. And now, the real work of the day begins. Take a slow breath. Let your body settle a little deeper into wherever you are resting. The morning is still young, and we have so much more to see. Let us walk out into the fields now, alongside Thomas, and watch the day unfold. The farm, as we have said, might be 80 acres, or 160, or even more, but not all of that land is under cultivation. Some of it is woodland, kept for firewood and building material and hunting. Some of it is pasture, where the animals graze. Some might be rocky or hilly or marshy, too difficult to farm. The actual cropland, the cleared, tilled, planted fields, might be 40 or 50 acres. And even that, by modern standards, is a large amount of land to work by hand and by horse. The crops depend on the region and the season. In the Midwest, corn is king. Corn was the great American crop, the crop that fed the family, fed the animals, and could be sold for cash. A farmer in Ohio or Indiana in 1850 might devote 20 or 30 acres to corn alone. Alongside the corn, he might grow wheat, oats, barley, rye, or hay. He might have a field of potatoes, a patch of flax for making linen cloth, and a kitchen garden near the house where vegetables are grown for the family's table. This morning, let us say that Thomas is going to work in the cornfield. The corn was planted back in May, and now in midsummer it is growing fast, but it needs attention. The weeds are growing too, and if they are not kept in check, they will compete with the corn for sunlight and water and nutrients. Weeding the corn is one of the great, never-ending tasks of the summer months. Thomas hitches up one of his horses, Buck, to a single-horse cultivator. This is a simple but effective tool, a metal frame with several curved iron teeth or shovels that is dragged between the rows of corn. As the horse walks forward, the teeth dig into the soil, uprooting the weeds and loosening the earth around the corn plants. Thomas walks behind the cultivator, guiding it with two wooden handles, steering the horse with gentle voice commands and a pair of long leather reins. G. That means turn right. Haw. That means turn left. Whoa. That means stop. Walk on. That means go. These are the words that every farm horse knew, the simple language of cooperation between human and animal. The work is slow and steady. The horse plods forward at a walking pace, and Thomas follows, his eyes on the ground, watching to make sure the cultivator teeth are running true between the rows without damaging the corn plants. Row after row after row, up and back across the field. The sun climbs higher and the air grows warmer. Insects buzz around Thomas's head and he swats at them absently. Sweat begins to bead on his forehead and trickle down the back of his neck. This is hard work, make no mistake. It is physically demanding, monotonous, and unrelenting. But there is also something deeply satisfying about it. The feeling of the soil beneath your feet. The sight of the clean, weed-free rows stretching out behind you. The knowledge that you are doing something real, something necessary, something that matters. Thomas is feeding his family. He is tending his land. He is doing the work that generations of farmers before him have done, and that generations after him will continue to do. Let us pause here for a moment and think about what farming was like in 1850 compared to what it is today. Today, a single farmer with modern machinery can farm thousands of acres. A combine harvester can cut and thresh an entire wheat field in a matter of hours. Tractors with GPS guidance systems can plough in perfectly straight lines without a human hand on the wheel. The sheer scale and efficiency of modern agriculture is astonishing. But in 1850, none of this existed. There were no tractors, no combines, no gasoline engines, no electricity. Everything was done by hand, by horse, or by ox. A farmer working with a single horse and a plough could cover maybe 2 acres in a day. Harvesting grain meant cutting it by hand with a scythe or a cradle, gathering it into bundles, stacking it in shocks, hauling it to the barn, and threshing it by beating it with a flail or trampling it under horses' hooves. Now, it is true that by 1850, some important new tools were beginning to appear. Cyrus McCormick had patented his mechanical reaper in 1834, and by the early 1850s, it was being manufactured and sold to farmers across the Midwest. The reaper was a horse-drawn machine that could cut grain much faster than a man with a scythe. It was a revolutionary invention, one that would eventually transform American agriculture. But in 1850, it was still relatively new, and many small farmers could not afford one. It cost somewhere around $120 to $150, a considerable sum when a farm labourer might earn 50 cents a day. Similarly, the steel plough, developed by John Deere in the late 1830s, was beginning to replace the old cast-iron ploughs that had been standard for decades. The steel plough was lighter, stronger, and cut through the tough prairie sod much more easily. But again, not every farmer had one yet. Change came slowly to the countryside, filtering in from the cities and the factories, one tool at a time. For Thomas, the tools of his trade are simple and well-worn. His plough is a cast-iron mouldboard plough, pulled by his team of horses. He has a harrow, a heavy wooden frame set with iron teeth. used to break up clods of earth and smooth the soil after ploughing. He has the cultivator we have already seen. He has a scythe for cutting hay and grain, a long curved blade set on a wooden handle. He has an axe for felling trees and splitting wood. He has a hoe, a rake, a pitchfork, a shovel. These are the basic tools of farming, and they have remained essentially unchanged for centuries. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us return to the cornfield, where Thomas is still at work. By mid-morning, he has covered perhaps a third of the field. He stops for a moment, pulling off his hat and wiping his brow with his shirt sleeve. He looks up at the sky, checking the position of the sun. Then he reaches for the jug of water that he brought with him, a heavy stoneware jug wrapped in a damp cloth to keep it cool. He pulls the cork and takes a long, deep drink. The water is cool and clean, drawn from the farm's well or from a nearby spring. It is wonderful. He pats Buck on the neck, says a few quiet words to the horse, and they continue. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mary is deep into her own morning's work, which is no less demanding than Thomas's. But we will visit her in a little while. For now, let us stay in the fields a bit longer, because there is more to see and understand about the farmer's daily labour. If it is not corn cultivation season, then Thomas might be doing any number of other tasks. In the spring, the big job is ploughing. Ploughing is the most fundamental act of farming, turning over the soil to prepare it for planting. Thomas would hitch both horses to the heavy plough and walk behind it, guiding it through the earth, turning up great ribbons of dark, rich soil. The smell of freshly ploughed earth is one of the most primal scents in the world. Rich and loamy and alive. It is the smell of potential, of seeds waiting to be sown, of food waiting to grow. Ploughing was also one of the most exhausting tasks. The plough was heavy, and the horses pulled it through soil that was often thick with roots and rocks. Thomas had to hold the plough steady, pressing down to keep the blade at the right depth, steering around obstacles and managing the horses all at once. At the end of a day of ploughing, his arms and shoulders would ache deeply, and his hands, even calloused as they were, would be raw and sore. After ploughing came harrowing, dragging the harrow across the ploughed field to break up the clods and create a smooth, even seedbed. Then came planting. For corn, this was usually done by hand in 1850, though mechanical corn planters were beginning to appear. Thomas would walk along the rows, dropping 2 or 3 kernels of corn into each hole, spaced about 3 feet apart, and covering them with a scoop of earth. For smaller grains like wheat and oats, the seed was broadcast by hand, scattered in wide, sweeping arcs across the field, a method that required a practiced eye and a steady hand to ensure even coverage. In the summer, there was cultivating, as we have seen, and also haying. Hay was crucial. It was the food that kept the horses, cow, and other livestock fed through the long winter months when there was no green pasture to graze. Cutting hay was done with a scythe, that long-bladed, graceful tool that you may have seen in old paintings or illustrations. Thomas would swing the scythe in long, rhythmic arcs, the blade whispering through the tall grass, cutting it close to the ground. The cut grass was left to dry in the sun for a day or two, then raked into long rows called windrows, and finally gathered up with pitchforks and piled onto a wagon to be hauled to the barn and stored in the hayloft. Haying was a community affair. Neighbours often helped each other, because the hay needed to be cut and dried and stored as quickly as possible before the weather could turn and ruin it. A sudden rainstorm on freshly cut hay could cause it to mould and rot, rendering it useless. So when haying season came, there was a sense of urgency, a cooperative spirit, as farmers worked together to get the job done. In the autumn, of course, came the harvest. This was the culmination of the entire year's work, the moment when all the planting and cultivating and praying and hoping came to fruition. The corn was picked by hand, the ears snapped from the stalks and tossed into a wagon. The wheat was cut with a scythe or a cradle, a special scythe with a set of wooden fingers that caught the grain stalks as they were cut and laid them in neat bundles. The bundles, called sheaves, were gathered and stood upright in groups called shocks to dry in the field before being hauled to the barn for threshing. But all of that is for another season. Right now, in the heat of summer, Thomas is cultivating his corn, and the morning is passing slowly and steadily. Let us leave the field for a while. Let us take a gentle walk back toward the house and see what the rest of the family is doing. The morning is golden and warm, and the sounds of the farm surround us, the chirping of crickets, the distant caw of a crow, the clatter of a woodpecker on a dead tree. Let us walk slowly and let the world breathe around us. If there is one thing that is important to understand about life on a farm in 1850, it is this. The farmer's wife worked just as hard as the farmer himself. Perhaps even harder in some ways, because her work never truly ended. The fields had seasons of planting and seasons of rest, but the household required attention every single day, all year long. Meals had to be cooked, clothes had to be washed and mended, children had to be cared for, the garden had to be tended, butter had to be churned, bread had to be baked, candles had to be dipped, soap had to be made, preserves had to be put up. On and on and on, a never-ending cycle of labour that kept the household running and the family alive. Mary, like every farm wife of her era, was the manager of a complex domestic enterprise. She did not merely cook and clean. She was a food preserver, a textile worker, a nurse, a teacher, a gardener, and an economist, all rolled into one. The smooth functioning of the household depended entirely on her skill, her knowledge, and her tireless effort. This morning, after breakfast has been cleared away and the dishes washed, Mary turns her attention to the kitchen garden. The kitchen garden is a patch of ground near the house, usually enclosed by a fence to keep the chickens and the pigs and the deer from getting in. It is Mary's domain, and she tends it with pride and care. In the garden, she grows the vegetables that will feed the family throughout the year. Beans, both pole beans that climb up stakes and bush beans that grow close to the ground. Peas, sweet and tender in the early summer. Squash, both summer squash and the hard winter varieties like butternut and acorn that can be stored in the cellar for months. Pumpkins, which will grow large and orange by autumn. Onions, carrots, turnips, beets, parsnips, cabbages. Potatoes, perhaps the most important vegetable of all, filling and easy to store. Tomatoes, though some people in 1850 still regarded them with suspicion, an old and fading belief that they were poisonous. Cucumbers, melons, sweet corn, herbs like dill and sage and thyme and parsley. The garden is a riot of green at this time of year, the plants lush and sprawling, heavy with produce. Mary walks among the rows, her bare feet on the warm earth, her skirt tucked up slightly to keep it out of the dirt. She carries a basket on her arm. She picks beans, snapping them from the vines with quick, practiced fingers. She checks the squash, turning them over to look for bugs or rot. She pulls a few weeds, tossing them aside. She pauses at the herb bed and pinches off a sprig of thyme, rubbing it between her fingers and bringing it to her nose. The smell is sharp and clean and wonderful. Little Emma follows her mother through the garden, chattering away in that ceaseless, joyful stream of talk that 4-year-olds produce. She picks up a fallen tomato and offers it to her mother. Mary smiles and thanks her, adding it to the basket. Sarah, the 10-year-old, is busy with her own tasks. Today she is doing laundry. Laundry Day in 1850 was an enormous undertaking, one of the most physically demanding chores of the entire week. It was so labour-intensive, in fact, that most families designated one specific day for it, usually Monday, but clothes got dirty on a farm and sometimes the washing couldn't wait. The process begins the night before, when dirty clothes are sorted and the most heavily soiled items are set to soak in cold water. In the morning, Water is hauled from the well and heated in a large iron kettle over an outdoor fire. Washing clothes indoors would fill the house with steam and heat, so it is done outside whenever possible. The hot water is poured into a large wooden washtub. Soap is added. The soap is homemade too, made from a combination of lye and animal fat. Lye is produced by pouring water through wood ashes, a process called leaching. The resulting liquid, called lye water, is caustic and strong-smelling. It is combined with rendered animal fat, usually saved from cooking, and boiled together in a large pot until the mixture thickens and saponifies, turning into soap. The soap is then cut into bars and stored for use throughout the year. It is not the gentle, perfumed soap we know today. It is harsh and strong, and it can be rough on the hands, but it cleans. Sarah, with her mother's guidance, scrubs the clothes on a washboard, a wooden frame with a ribbed metal or glass surface. Each garment is rubbed vigorously against the ridges, working the soap into the fabric and loosening the dirt. It is hard work, especially for a 10-year-old girl. Her arms get tired and her hands get red and sore. But she does it without complaining because she knows it needs to be done and because she has been doing it since she was old enough to reach the washboard. After scrubbing, the clothes are rinsed in clean water, wrung out by hand, which takes considerable strength, and hung on a clothesline to dry. The clothesline is strung between two posts in the yard, and the clothes are pinned up with simple wooden clothespins. If the weather is fine, the clothes will dry in a few hours, stiffened by the sun and the breeze, smelling of fresh air and sunlight. If the weather is not fine, well, that is a problem. Wet laundry that cannot be dried must be hung inside, draped over chairs and lines strung across the main room, making the house damp and steamy. It is one of the many small challenges of daily life that we rarely think about today, when we can simply toss our clothes into a dryer and press a button. While Sarah works on the laundry, Mary has moved on to another task: bread making. Bread is the foundation of the farm family's diet. It is eaten at every meal, and making it is one of the farm wife's most important skills. The bread that Mary makes is a simple wheat bread, though on some farms, especially on the frontier, cornbread or rye bread might be more common, depending on what grains were available. Wheat flour is a bit of a luxury on some farms, and it might need to be purchased at the general store or milled from the farmer's own wheat crop at a local grist mill. Mary has set her bread dough to rise earlier in the morning, after breakfast. She mixed the flour with water, salt, and a bit of yeast, or more commonly, a piece of sourdough starter saved from the last batch of bread. The starter is a living culture of wild yeast and bacteria kept alive in a crock in the kitchen, fed regularly with flour and water. It gives the bread a slightly tangy flavour and a wonderful, chewy texture. The dough has been rising in a large bowl covered with a cloth near the warmth of the stove. Now Mary punches it down, kneads it again on the floured table, shapes it into loaves, and places them in greased baking pans. She slides them into the oven of the cook stove and closes the door. The oven temperature is not precisely controlled. There are no dials or thermometers. Mary judges the heat by experience, by holding her hand inside the oven and counting the seconds until it becomes too hot to bear. It is a skill learned through years of practice, and Mary is very good at it. The bread will bake for about an hour, filling the house with that extraordinary aroma that is perhaps the most universally loved smell in the world. Fresh baked bread. It is the smell of home, of comfort, of nourishment. When the loaves come out of the oven, they are golden brown and crusty, with a hollow sound when you tap the bottom. Mary sets them on a wooden rack to cool. They will be sliced for the midday meal, and they will be delicious. In between all these tasks, Mary also finds time to do a dozen other small things. She sweeps the floor. She checks on the baby chicks in the brooder, a small enclosed space kept warm by a lantern. She stirs the pot of beans that is simmering on the back of the stove, the start of tomorrow's supper. She mends a tear in James's trousers, sitting by the window for a few minutes with her needle and thread. She gives Emma a piece of string and a handful of buttons to play with, which keeps the child happily occupied for a surprisingly long time. Mary's life is one of constant motion, constant work, constant attention, and yet she moves through it with a calm, steady competence that is remarkable. She does not rush, she does not panic, she simply does what needs to be done, one task at a time, with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows her work and takes pride in it. There is a common misconception about farm wives of this era, that they were somehow subordinate or unimportant, mere helpers to their husbands. Nothing could be further from the truth. The farm wife was an equal partner in the enterprise of the farm. Without her labour, the household could not function. Without her skill, the family could not eat, could not be clothed, could not be kept healthy. She was indispensable, and most farmers knew it. Let us step back from Mary's busy morning for a moment and take a breath. The day is growing warmer now. The sun is climbing toward its midpoint, and the shadows are growing shorter. In the fields, Thomas is still at work. In the house, Mary is managing a dozen tasks at once. The children are busy with their own small duties. It is a beautiful, ordinary day on an American farm in 1850, and the day is only half over. As the sun rises higher and the morning begins to give way to midday, let us pause for a moment. Let us rest here, in the warmth of this summer day, and let the sounds of the farm wash over us. The clucking of the hens, the distant ring of an axe somewhere across the valley, the whisper of the wind through the cornstalks, the creak of the barn door, the laughter of children. Let us breathe. And then, gently, let us move on to the next part of the day. In 1850, the midday meal was called dinner, not lunch. Lunch was a relatively modern term that had not yet come into common use in rural America. Dinner was the main meal of the day, the largest and most substantial, eaten in the middle of the day, when the family's energy needed replenishing most. The evening meal, eaten after the day's work was done, was called supper, and it was usually lighter and simpler. By about noon, or perhaps a bit earlier, the sun is high and hot, and the morning's work has taken its toll. Thomas comes in from the fields, his shirt damp with sweat, his face flushed from the sun. James comes in from whatever task he's been doing, maybe splitting firewood, maybe mending a fence, maybe helping a neighbour with a project. Even 7-year-old Will has been working, feeding the chickens, carrying water, gathering kindling for the fire. Everyone washes up. There is a basin and a pitcher of water on a stand near the door, and a towel hanging on a hook. Hands and faces are washed, sleeves rolled down, hair smoothed. Then the family gathers at the table. Mary has prepared a hearty dinner. The menu might include some of the following: a pot of beans, slow-cooked with a piece of salt pork, seasoned with onion and molasses. Boiled potatoes, firm and white, with a knob of butter melting on top. Fresh bread, sliced thick, still warm from the oven. Cornbread, perhaps, golden and crumbly, made with cornmeal, eggs and buttermilk. Some kind of preserved meat, maybe ham or sausage, smoked and salty. And from the garden, whatever is in season: boiled green beans, sliced tomatoes, sweet corn cut from the cob, a dish of pickled cucumbers. For dessert, if there is one, it might be a simple pie, apple or berry, made with fruit from the farm's own trees or gathered from the wild. Pie was a remarkably common food on the American farm. Many families ate pie at nearly every meal, including breakfast. It was a practical food, a way to use up fruit and to provide a sweet treat that could be made with the basic ingredients always on hand: flour, lard, sugar, and whatever fruit was available. The dinner table is crowded and full. Bowls and platters are passed from hand to hand. Thomas serves himself generous portions because he has been working hard and he needs the fuel. Mary eats more modestly but steadily. The children eat with varying degrees of enthusiasm depending on the menu. James eats everything put in front of him because he is 12 and perpetually hungry. Sarah picks delicately at her food. Will would rather talk than eat, and he has to be gently reminded to finish his potatoes. Emma eats what she can, makes a mess of the rest, and seems perfectly content. The conversation at dinner is a little more relaxed than at breakfast. The morning's work is done and there is a natural pause in the day. Thomas mentions that the corn is looking good, that the cultivating is going well. He says he needs to check the fence in the north pasture because he thinks he saw a place where the rails are sagging. Mary tells him about the bread she baked and that she is planning to make preserves tomorrow if the berries are ripe. Sarah mentions that she saw a bluebird on the fence post. Will wants to know if he can go fishing after dinner. Thomas considers the fishing question. Going fishing meant walking down to the creek that runs along the edge of the property, about a quarter-mile away. It was a pleasant walk through the meadow and down a shady path through the woods. The creek was a good fishing spot, home to small catfish, perch and sunfish, nothing large enough to be a real meal but fun to catch. And fishing was one of the few recreational activities that a farm child could enjoy without neglecting his duties, as long as the chores were done first. Thomas tells Will that he can go fishing for a little while, but only after he has carried water to the hog pen and stacked the kindling that Thomas split this morning. Will agrees eagerly, bolting the rest of his dinner and racing outside to finish his chores so he can get to the creek as quickly as possible. After dinner, there is a brief period of rest. Not a long one, nothing like the extended afternoon siestas of some cultures, but a pause, a chance to sit down, to let the food settle, to close your eyes for a few minutes. Thomas might sit on the porch in his rocking chair, his hat pulled down over his eyes. Mary might sit in her chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, resting but not sleeping. The house is quiet. Even the animals seem to rest in the middle of the day, the horses standing in the shade of the barn, the cow lying in the pasture with her legs folded beneath her, the chickens dust bathing in a patch of dry earth near the hen house. This midday rest is brief, perhaps 15 or 20 minutes, but it is essential. The afternoon's work is still ahead, and it will not wait. But for now, for just a few minutes, the farm is at peace. The sun is at its highest point, casting short shadows. The air is warm and still. A hawk circles lazily overhead, riding the thermals. A butterfly drifts across the garden. A bumblebee hums among the squash blossoms. It is a moment of perfect stillness, a moment to simply be. And then, slowly, the farm stirs back to life, and the afternoon begins. The afternoon stretches ahead, long and warm. There is much still to do. A farmer's day does not end at noon, not by a long stretch. The afternoon is often the hottest part of the day, and the work can feel heavier, more tiring, but it must be done. Thomas goes back to the fields. Perhaps he finishes the cultivating in the cornfield, or perhaps he moves on to another task. There is always another task. The fences need attention, a rail has fallen here, a post is leaning there. The fence around the farm is made of split rails, long, straight pieces of wood, usually oak or chestnut, split from logs with a maul and wedges. They are stacked in a zigzag pattern, each rail resting on the one below it at an angle, forming a sturdy fence without the need for posts or nails. This is the famous split-rail fence that Abraham Lincoln was known for building in his youth. It is simple, effective, and requires no hardware, just wood and labour. But fences take a beating from weather and animals and time. Rails rot, they shift, they fall. Animals lean against them, push through them, jump over them. Keeping the fences in good repair is a constant job, and Thomas walks the fence line periodically, noting the places that need fixing and tending to them as time allows. This afternoon he takes his axe and his hammer and walks out to the north pasture, where the fence has a weak spot. He replaces a couple of rotted rails with new ones that he split last week and left stacked near the barn. The work is straightforward but physical. Lifting heavy rails into place, wedging them snugly between the support posts, making sure the fence is solid enough to keep the cow and horses from wandering into the cornfield. It takes about an hour, and by the time he is done, his shirt is soaked with sweat and his arms are aching. He walks over to the well and draws up a bucket of cold water. He drinks deeply, then pours the rest over his head, gasping at the shock of the cold water on his hot skin. It feels wonderful, utterly wonderful. Simple pleasures, but powerful ones. Meanwhile, James, the 12-year-old, is working on his own tasks. James is old enough now to handle some of the farm work on his own, and his father gives him assignments each morning. Today, James is splitting firewood. Firewood is one of the farm's most important resources. It is the only source of heat and cooking fuel. A farm family in 1850 might burn 15 to 20 cords of wood in a year, more in colder climates. A cord of wood is a stack measuring 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. 20 cords is an enormous amount of wood, and it all has to be cut, split, hauled, and stacked. James stands at the chopping block, a large, flat-topped stump set up near the woodshed. He sets a piece of oak on the block, raises the splitting maul over his head, and brings it down with a sharp crack. The wood splits cleanly, falling apart into 2 halves. He sets each half on the block and splits it again and again until he has a pile of pieces the right size for the stove. Then he stacks them neatly in the woodshed, building the rows carefully so they don't tumble over. James is not a large boy, but he is wiry and strong. He has been doing chores since he was old enough to carry a bucket, and his body is accustomed to physical labour in a way that most children today never experience. He does not complain about the work, though he might wish he were down at the creek with Will fishing. But he understands, in the way that farm children understand, that work comes first. It always comes first. Sarah is helping her mother with the afternoon's domestic tasks. Today, Mary is making preserves. The blackberries along the edge of the woods are ripe, and Sarah picked several quarts of them this morning, her fingers stained purple from the juice. Now Mary is cooking them down with sugar in a large iron pot on the stove, stirring constantly to prevent them from sticking and burning. The kitchen is hot and sweet-smelling. The preserves bubble and thicken, turning from a bright, loose liquid into a dark, glossy jam. Mary ladles the hot jam into stoneware crocks, sealing them with circles of cloth dipped in melted beeswax. These jars of preserves will be stored in the cellar, and they will last through the winter, providing a taste of summer sweetness on cold, grey January mornings. The cellar, or root cellar, is an essential part of the farm. It is a small underground room, dug into the earth near the house, often built into a hillside. The earthen walls and floor keep the temperature cool and steady, typically around 50 to 55 degrees, even in the heat of summer or the cold of winter. The cellar is where the family stores its perishable foods, crocks of butter, jugs of cider and vinegar, barrels of apples, bins of potatoes, turnips and carrots, jars of preserves and pickles, smoked hams and sausages hanging from the ceiling beams. The cellar is dark and cool and slightly damp, with a rich, earthy smell. Mary goes down there several times a day, fetching ingredients for meals, checking on the stores, making sure nothing has spoiled. Managing the family's food supply is one of her most important responsibilities. If she miscalculates, if she doesn't preserve enough food for the winter, the family will go hungry. It is a serious business, and Mary takes it very seriously. Little Emma spends the afternoon playing near the house, within sight and earshot of her mother. She plays with the farm cat, a big orange tabby who tolerates her attention with remarkable patience. She picks dandelions and weaves them into a clumsy chain. She sits on the porch step and talks to her rag doll, telling it elaborate stories in her high, sweet voice. Children's toys in 1850 were simple and few. A rag doll made by her mother from scraps of cloth and stuffed with rags or sawdust. A wooden top that her father carved for her. a set of wooden blocks, maybe a small porcelain-headed doll if the family could afford one, a cherished possession that would be handled with great care. Children did not have rooms full of toys. They played with what was available: sticks, stones, mud, water, animals, their own imagination, and they seemed to manage just fine. Will, having finished his chores with record speed, has made his way down to the creek with a fishing pole. The fishing pole is a simple affair: a long, flexible stick, a length of string, a hook bent from a pin, and a worm dug from the garden. He sits on the bank of the creek, his bare feet dangling in the cool water, watching the line for any sign of a nibble. The creek is a beautiful spot. It runs through a little valley, shaded by willows and sycamores, the water clear and shallow, flowing over a bed of smooth stones and sandy patches. Dragonflies dart above the surface. A kingfisher perches on a branch overhanging the water, watching for minnows. The sound of the creek is gentle and constant, a soft, murmuring gurgle that is one of the most soothing sounds in nature. Will catches a few small sunfish, bright and colourful, their scales glinting in the dappled light. He admires each one for a moment before carefully removing the hook and tossing it back. He is not fishing for food today, not really. He is fishing for the pure pleasure of it, for the joy of sitting by the water on a warm afternoon with nothing to do but wait and watch and listen. These moments of leisure were rare and precious on a farm. There was always so much work to do that free time was scarce. But when it came, it was savoured. A boy sitting by a creek with a fishing pole, a girl reading a book by the window, a farmer sitting on his porch watching the sunset. These small pleasures were the counterpoint to the hard labour, the gentle balance that made the demanding life bearable and even beautiful. As the afternoon wears on, the shadows begin to lengthen. The sun, which has been beating down all day, begins to slide toward the western horizon. The air cools slightly, and a gentle breeze picks up, rustling the leaves and bending the taller grasses. The quality of the light changes, becoming warmer, more golden, more tender. The world seems to soften. It is time soon for the evening chores. But first, let us linger here a moment longer. Let us feel the warmth of the late afternoon sun on our skin. Let us listen to the creek and the bird song and the distant, drowsy hum of insects. Let us rest. The late afternoon brings a shift in the rhythm of the day. The heavy work of the middle hours gives way to a familiar set of tasks, the evening chores. These are largely a mirror of the morning chores, the same animals to tend, the same duties to perform, but in reverse. Thomas comes in from the fields, unhitches Buck from the cultivator, and leads the horse to the barn. He rubs the horse down with a handful of straw, checking for any sore spots where the harness might have rubbed. He gives both horses their evening feed of grain and fills their water buckets. The horses eat contentedly, their big jaws moving slowly, their ears flicking back and forth. Then comes the evening milking. Thomas sits down beside the cow on his three-legged stool, places the bucket beneath her, and begins the rhythmic work of milking. It is the same as this morning, the same motions, the same sounds, the same warm, comforting routine. The cow is calm and cooperative. She has been grazing in the pasture all day and is glad to be relieved of her milk. James helps with the evening chores. He feeds the hogs their evening slop, a mixture of kitchen scraps, sour milk, and leftover mush. He gathers the eggs from the chicken coop, the hens having laid their afternoon eggs. He latches the coop door securely because a fox or a raccoon would make short work of the chickens if given the chance. Predators are a constant concern on the farm. Foxes, hawks, coyotes, weasels, even stray dogs can decimate a flock of chickens in a single night. Keeping the animals safe is part of the daily routine. Will returns from the creek, sunburned and happy, his fishing pole over his shoulder. He tells his father about the fish he caught, exaggerating their size slightly, as fishermen of all ages are known to do. Thomas smiles and ruffles the boy's hair, sending him inside to wash up for supper. The farmyard in the late afternoon is a busy, lively place. Animals are moving, people are calling to each other, gates are opening and closing. There is a comfortable bustle, a sense of the day winding down, of tasks being completed, of everything settling into its proper place for the night. Thomas takes a moment to walk around the farmyard, checking on things. He glances at the sky, reading the clouds. He checks the woodpile. He looks at the garden, noting how the tomatoes are ripening and the squash are swelling on their vines. He opens the barn door and peers inside, making sure everything is in order. He is a careful man, a thorough man. He knows that small problems, if ignored, can become big problems very quickly on a farm. A loose board, a leaking roof, a broken latch. These are the kinds of things that need attention before they cause real trouble. As Thomas finishes his rounds, the sun is sinking low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deepening blue. The shadows stretch long across the fields, and the air takes on that special golden quality that comes only in the last hour of daylight. It is one of the most beautiful times of day, and even a man as hard-working and practical as Thomas pauses to appreciate it. He stands at the edge of the cornfield and looks out over his land. The corn stretches away before him, row after row, the stalks tall and green, the tassels just beginning to form at the top. Beyond the corn, the wheat field is turning golden, almost ready for harvest. Beyond that, the dark line of the woods, and above it all, the vast, deepening sky. This is his world, his home, his life's work. And in this quiet moment, standing alone at the edge of his fields in the fading light, he feels a deep, wordless satisfaction. Not excitement, not pride exactly, but something more fundamental. A sense of rightness, a sense of belonging. He is exactly where he is supposed to be, doing exactly what he is supposed to do. He turns and walks back toward the house, where the windows are glowing with the warm light of the fire inside. The smell of supper is in the air. His family is waiting. Let us go with him. The evening meal, supper, is simpler than dinner. The heavy work of the day is done, and the family's appetite, while still present, is not as fierce as it was at midday. Supper is a quieter affair, a chance to sit together, to eat something warm and comforting, and to let the day wind down. Mary has prepared a straightforward meal. Perhaps it is cornbread and milk, a classic rural supper so common that it was almost a cliché. The cornbread is fresh from the oven, golden and fragrant, and it is broken into pieces and placed in a bowl, then covered with cold milk from the morning's milking. It is a simple combination, but surprisingly satisfying, the crumbly sweetness of the cornbread softened by the cool, rich milk. Or perhaps supper is leftover beans from dinner, reheated on the stove, served with slices of bread and butter. Or it might be a simple stew, a pot of vegetables from the garden, simmered together with a bit of salt pork for flavour. Potatoes, carrots, onions, green beans, maybe a few ears of corn cut from the cob, all cooked together in a single pot until everything is tender and the broth is rich and savoury. Whatever the meal, it is eaten at the same table where the family has eaten breakfast and dinner. The same tin plates, the same wooden spoons, the same simple homemade food. But there is a different feeling to supper. The urgency of the day is gone. The work is finished, or at least finished enough. There is time to sit a little longer, to talk a little more, to enjoy each other's company. Thomas eats slowly, savouring the food. He is tired, the good, deep kind of tired that comes from a full day of physical labour. His muscles ache, but it is a pleasant ache, the kind that tells you that you have used your body the way it was meant to be used. He drinks his coffee, now lukewarm, and listens to his family talk. Mary tells him about the preserves she made today, how many jars she filled, how sweet the blackberries were this year. She mentions that the kitchen garden needs weeding again and that the cabbages are nearly ready to be harvested. She says she wants to make sauerkraut this weekend if Thomas can help her set up the crocks. Sarah talks about a letter she received from her cousin in town, who is going to a real school with a real teacher and who says they are learning geography and reading from a printed textbook. Sarah is envious, though she does not say so directly. Education is a complicated matter on the farm. Most farm children receive some schooling, but it is often sporadic and limited, especially during the busy planting and harvesting seasons. In many rural areas of America in 1850, schools are small, one-room buildings, often made of logs, where a single teacher instructs children of all ages in the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, and perhaps some history and geography. The school year is short, usually only a few months in the winter, when the demands of the farm are lightest. In the summer and fall, children are needed at home, and school takes a back seat to the work of the land. Thomas values education. He is not an uneducated man himself. He can read and write, he knows his numbers, he reads the newspaper when he can get one, and he owns a few books. A Bible, of course, which is the most important book in the house, and perhaps a copy of an almanac, which is a practical guide to planting times, weather predictions, home remedies, and useful household tips. He might also have a book or two of history or biography, maybe a copy of Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, or a collection of essays. Books are not common on the farm, but they are treasured. Thomas tells Sarah that he will try to send her to school for the full term this winter if the family can spare her from the household work. Sarah's face lights up. She loves learning, loves reading, loves the feeling of knowledge opening up new worlds in her mind. James is quiet. He is thinking about the day's work, about the wood he split, about the fence rail he helped his father repair. He is also thinking about the future. At 12, he is beginning to think about what his life will be. Will he stay on the farm, as his father did? Will he go west, where there is open land and opportunity? Will he learn a trade, become a blacksmith or a carpenter or a wheelwright? These are the questions that occupy the minds of farm boys in 1850, and they are big, weighty questions, though James does not talk about them much. He keeps them inside, turning them over slowly, the way you turn a stone in your hand. Will is tired. His eyelids are drooping, his head nodding. The fishing and the chores and the sunshine have worn him out. He eats his supper mechanically, barely tasting it, his body already beginning to shut down for the night. Little Emma is sitting on her mother's lap, her head resting against Mary's chest, her thumb in her mouth. She is already half asleep, lulled by the warmth and the food and the gentle murmur of her family's voices around her. After supper, the dishes are cleared and washed quickly. The leftover food is put away, covered with cloths to keep the flies off. The kitchen is tidied, the floor swept, the fire banked for the night, the stove damped down but not entirely extinguished, so that a bed of coals will remain through the night, making it easier to start the fire again in the morning. And now the evening truly begins, the brief, precious time between the end of the day's work and the moment of sleep. Let us settle in for the evening here with this family and see how they spend these quiet hours. The evening in a farmhouse in 1850 is lit by fire. The fireplace casts a warm, flickering glow across the room, creating pools of light and shadow that shift and dance on the walls and ceiling. On the table, there might be a candle, a single tallow candle, homemade from rendered beef fat, its flames small and yellow and slightly smoky. Or there might be an oil lamp, a simple device with a glass chimney and a cotton wick, burning whale oil or perhaps lard oil. Kerosene lamps were just beginning to appear in the 1850s as the petroleum industry was in its earliest infancy, and they would soon revolutionize home lighting. But for now, most farm families relied on candles and simple oil lamps. The light is not bright by our standards. It is soft, warm, and limited. You cannot read easily by it unless you sit very close to the source. But it is enough. It is enough to see each other's faces, to find your way across the room, to do the simple tasks of the evening. Thomas sits in his chair near the fire. It is a rocking chair made by a local craftsman, or perhaps by Thomas himself. It is a simple piece of furniture, but it is comfortable, and it is his place. He rocks slowly, his pipe in his hand. He lights the pipe with a splint of wood from the fire, drawing in the smoke and letting it curl out from between his lips. The tobacco is locally grown or purchased cheaply at the general store. Pipe smoking is one of Thomas's few indulgences, a small pleasure that he looks forward to at the end of each day. He picks up the newspaper. It is not today's newspaper. It might be a week old, or even 2 weeks old, depending on how often mail is delivered and how far the nearest town is. But Thomas does not mind. News from the outside world arrives slowly on the farm, and that is fine. He reads by the light of the fire, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. The newspaper carries stories of the great events of the day. In 1850, those events include the heated debates over slavery, the Compromise of 1850, the question of whether the new territories in the West will be free or slave. California has just been admitted to the Union as a free state. The Fugitive Slave Act has been passed, requiring citizens in the North to assist in the return of escaped slaves, a law that is deeply controversial and widely resisted. There is talk of railroads, of gold in California, of new inventions and new factories in the eastern cities. Thomas reads these stories with interest, but they feel distant. The politics of Washington, the clamour of the cities, the great national debates, they seem far away from this quiet farmhouse, from these fields and barns and animals. Thomas has opinions, of course. He is a thinking man, and he cares about his country. But his first concern, his daily concern, is his farm, his family, his crops, his animals. The great events of the world will unfold whether he worries about them or not. The corn, on the other hand, needs his attention right now. Mary sits in her own chair on the other side of the fire, her sewing basket on her lap. She is mending. There is always mending to do. A sock with a hole in the toe, a shirt with a torn seam, a pair of trousers with a worn-out knee. Clothing is expensive and hard to come by, and every garment is repaired and re-repaired until it is truly beyond saving. Then it is cut up for quilt patches, or for rags, or for stuffing a doll or a pillow. Nothing is wasted. Mary's sewing skills are considerable. She can mend, she can patch, she can darn, and she can also make clothing from scratch. She cuts and sews shirts, dresses, aprons, bonnets, and children's clothing, using fabric that she buys at the general store or, in some cases, weaves herself on the loom in the corner of the room. Home weaving is becoming less common by 1850 as factory-made cloth becomes cheaper and more widely available, but many farm women still spin thread from wool or flax and weave it into cloth. It is time-consuming work, but it produces a sturdy, durable fabric that wears well. While Mary sews, she hums a quiet tune. It might be a hymn, Amazing Grace or Rock of Ages, familiar melodies that she has known since childhood. Or it might be a folk song passed down through her family, a sweet, simple melody about love or loss or the beauty of the natural world. The humming blends with the crackle of the fire and the gentle squeak of Thomas's rocking chair, creating a soft, comforting soundtrack for the evening. Sarah is reading. She has a book, a rare and precious thing. It might be a reader, a school book full of short stories and poems and moral lessons designed for young people. Or it might be a novel, perhaps something by James Fenimore Cooper or Washington Irving, borrowed from a neighbour or from a small lending library in town. Sarah reads slowly, carefully, sounding out the harder words, absorbed in the story. Reading is her great love, her window into a world beyond the farm, a world of adventure and ideas and possibility. James is whittling. He has a small, sharp knife and a piece of soft pine, and he is carving something. A whistle, perhaps, or a small animal figure. Whittling is a common pastime for boys and men on the farm, a way to keep the hands busy while the mind wanders. James is getting good at it. His carvings are becoming more detailed, more lifelike. His father has noticed and has told him in his quiet, understated way that the boy has talent. Will and Emma are already in bed. Mary carried Emma up the ladder a few minutes after supper, the little girl limp and heavy with sleep. She tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and left her to drift off. Will went up on his own, protesting that he wasn't tired even as he yawned hugely. He was asleep within minutes of his head hitting the pillow, his body surrendering to the deep, dreamless sleep of a child who has spent the day in the sun and the water and the fresh air. The evening passes slowly, quietly. There is no radio, no television, no internet, no phone. There is nothing to distract the family from each other and from the simple pleasures of a quiet evening at home. They sit together, each engaged in their own activity but sharing the same space, the same warmth, the same light. They are together, and that is enough. Sometimes, on evenings like this, Thomas reads aloud. He reads from the Bible, a chapter from the New Testament perhaps, or a psalm. His voice is low and steady, and the ancient words fill the room with a sense of solemnity and peace. The family listens, even Sarah, who puts down her book, and James, who lowers his knife. These are words they have heard many times before, but they never grow old. They are the bedrock of the family's faith, the foundation of their values, the common thread that connects them to each other and to something larger than themselves. After the reading, the family might pray together. Thomas leads the prayer, giving thanks for the day, for the health of the family, for the food on the table, for the good weather. He asks for God's protection through the night, for strength for the day ahead, for wisdom and patience. Mary adds her own quiet prayer, and the children bow their heads and close their eyes. Then it is time for bed. The candle is snuffed out. The fire is banked one final time, the coals pushed together and covered with a layer of ash to keep them alive until morning. The lamp is turned down and extinguished. The house settles into darkness. Thomas and Mary go to their room. They undress in the dark, hanging their clothes over the chair, pulling on their nightclothes. They climb into bed, the straw mattress rustling beneath them, the quilt heavy and warm on top. They lie side by side, listening to the sounds of the night. The house creaks and pops as it cools. Outside, the crickets sing, a high, steady chorus that fills the darkness. An owl calls from the woods, its voice low and haunting. Far away, a coyote howls, a thin, wavering cry that rises and falls like a lonely song. Mary says something to Thomas, something soft and quiet. Maybe she tells him about a letter she wants to write to her sister. Maybe she asks him about the plans for tomorrow. Maybe she simply says good night. Thomas murmurs a reply, his voice already thick with sleep. And then, one by one, the sounds of the household fade. The breathing deepens. The bodies relax. The minds let go of the day's thoughts and concerns. Sleep comes, as it always does, gently and completely, pulling each member of the family down into its dark, warm embrace. The farm is quiet. The day is done. But before we let them sleep, let us linger a while longer. Let us think about some other aspects of this life that we haven't yet explored. There is so much more to know, so many more details to discover. Let us continue our journey gently, quietly, through the broader world of the American farm in 1850. The farm, as self-sufficient as it was, did not exist in isolation. It was part of a community, a network of neighbours, merchants, churches and institutions that together formed the fabric of rural life. Let us take a moment to explore that wider world, to see what lay beyond the boundaries of Thomas's farm. The nearest town was perhaps 5 or 10 miles away. By modern standards, that is nothing, a short drive. But in 1850, 5 miles was a significant distance. There were no cars, no buses, no paved roads. Travel was by horse, by wagon, or on foot. A trip to town took the better part of a morning, jolting along rutted dirt roads in a horse-drawn wagon, and the return trip took equally long. A round trip to town was an all-day affair, and it was not undertaken lightly. The road to town was little more than a dirt track, worn by the wheels of countless wagons and the hooves of countless horses. In dry weather, it was dusty and bumpy. In wet weather, it became a quagmire, a thick, deep river of mud that could swallow a wagon wheel up to the axle. Spring was the worst time for travel, when the snow melted and the rain fell and the roads became nearly impassable. Farmers sometimes called it the mud season, and they avoided travel during this period whenever possible. But periodically, a trip to town was necessary. There were things the farm could not produce for itself, and these had to be purchased at the general store. The general store was the commercial heart of the small town, a single building that sold everything a farm family might need: salt and sugar, coffee and tea, flour and cornmeal. If the farmer did not grow his own grain or did not have access to a local grist mill, cloth and thread, needles and pins, nails and screws, tools and hardware, medicine and tonics, books and newspapers, candy for the children, a rare and wonderful treat, tobacco, gunpowder and shot, kerosene, boots and shoes, hats and ribbons, pots and pans. The store was a cramped, cluttered, wonderful place, filled from floor to ceiling with goods of every description. Barrels of crackers and pickles stood on the floor. Bolts of fabric lined the shelves. Ropes of dried sausage hung from the rafters. Behind the counter, the storekeeper presided, a man who knew everyone in the community and who served not only as a merchant, but as a source of news, gossip, and advice. Many transactions at the general store were conducted by barter rather than cash. Cash money was scarce in rural America. A farmer might bring in a basket of eggs, a few pounds of butter, a bag of dried beans, or a load of firewood, and trade them for the goods he needed. The storekeeper kept a running account, a ledger in which each customer's credits and debits were recorded, and balances were settled periodically, often at harvest time, when the farmer had cash from selling his crops. The trip to town was also a social occasion. While Thomas conducted business at the store, Mary visited with the other women, catching up on news, exchanging recipes and remedies, comparing notes on their gardens and their children. The children explored the town, which to them seemed impossibly large and exciting, with its handful of buildings and its dusty main street. They pressed their faces against the window of the general store, gazing longingly at the jars of peppermint sticks and lemon drops behind the counter. If they were very lucky, Thomas might buy them each a penny's worth of candy, a small paper sack of hard sweets that they would savour for days. The town might also have a blacksmith, a man who shoed horses, repaired tools, made iron hardware, and performed countless other essential services. The blacksmith's shop was a hot, noisy, fascinating place, with its roaring forge, its clanging anvil, its smell of burning coal and hot iron. Children loved to watch the blacksmith at work, watching the sparks fly as he hammered a glowing piece of metal into a horseshoe or a hinge. There might be a doctor, too, though his services were limited by the medical knowledge of the time. Doctors in 1850 had few effective treatments. They relied heavily on bleeding, purging, and herbal remedies, practices that were often as harmful as the diseases they were meant to cure. Surgery was performed without anaesthesia, or with only the rudimentary anaesthesia that had just been developed in the late 1840s. Ether and chloroform were beginning to be used, but they were not yet widely available. For most farm families, illness and injury were dealt with at home, using traditional remedies passed down through the generations. Mustard plasters for chest colds, willow bark tea for fever, honey and vinegar for sore throats, poultices of bread and milk for infections. These remedies were of varying effectiveness, but they were all that most people had. Let us turn now to the church, which was the social and spiritual centre of the rural community. In 1850, religion was woven into the very fabric of American life, and nowhere more so than on the farm. Most farm families attended church regularly, usually on Sunday, the one day of the week when work was reduced to the bare minimum. The church might be a small white-painted building with a steeple and a bell, standing at a crossroads or at the edge of town. It might be Methodist or Baptist or Presbyterian or any of the many Protestant denominations that flourished in rural America. Some communities had a Catholic church, especially in areas settled by Irish or German immigrants. Sunday morning was a special time. The family rose early, as always, and performed the essential chores, milking and feeding, that could not be neglected even on the Sabbath. Then they washed and dressed in their best clothes, their Sunday clothes, which were kept separate from their everyday work clothes and worn only to church and on special occasions. Thomas might have a dark suit, a white shirt and a string tie. Mary would wear her best dress, perhaps a dark calico or a simple cotton print, with a bonnet and a shawl. The children were scrubbed and combed and buttoned into their neatest outfits, a process that involved a good deal of squirming and protesting, especially from Will. The family loaded into the wagon, Thomas driving, Mary beside him, the children in the back, and set off for church. The drive might take 30 minutes or an hour, depending on the distance. Along the way, they passed other families in their own wagons, all headed in the same direction. Neighbours waved to each other and sometimes stopped to chat for a moment before continuing on. The church service was long by our standards, often 2 hours or more. The preacher delivered a sermon, typically a fiery, impassioned discourse on sin, salvation, and the need for moral rectitude. The congregation sang hymns, their voices rising together in the small, resonant space of the church. There were prayers, readings from the Bible, and sometimes special announcements about community events, a barn raising, a quilting bee, a harvest festival. For the children, church could be a trying experience. Sitting still for 2 hours on a hard wooden pew in their uncomfortable Sunday clothes, listening to a sermon that they only partially understood, was a test of endurance. Will squirmed and fidgeted until Mary placed a firm hand on his knee. Sarah stared at the stained glass window above the altar, fascinated by the way the coloured light fell on the floor. James sat stoically, doing his best to pay attention, but occasionally drifting into daydreams about fishing. But church was also a deeply meaningful experience for the family. It was a time to reflect, to give thanks, to seek guidance and comfort. The rituals of the service, the familiar hymns, the well-worn phrases of the prayers, provided a sense of continuity and stability that was deeply comforting in a life that was often uncertain and precarious. After the service, the congregation gathered outside the church, and this was perhaps the most important part of the whole event. It was the social hour, the time when neighbours who lived miles apart could meet, talk, and catch up. Men discussed crops and weather and politics. Women shared recipes and news and concerns about their children. Young people flirted and blushed and tried to look casual about it. Children ran and played, released from the constraints of the pew, their voices ringing across the churchyard. Sometimes, after church, there would be a community dinner, a potluck meal where each family brought a dish to share. The tables, set up on sawhorses under the shade of the church's oak trees, would groan under the weight of the food: fried chicken, baked ham, cornbread, biscuits, green beans, coleslaw, pickles, pies, cakes, and countless other dishes. The community ate together, laughed together, enjoyed each other's company. It was a feast of food and fellowship, a celebration of the bonds that held the community together. These community bonds were strong and essential. On the isolated farms of rural America, neighbors depended on each other in ways that are hard to imagine today. If a barn burned down, the neighbors gathered to help build a new one. If a farmer fell ill during harvest season, his neighbors harvested his crops for him. If a family ran short of food in the lean months of late winter, neighbors shared what they had. Barn raisings were perhaps the most dramatic example of this communal spirit. When a farmer needed a new barn, he prepared the materials in advance, cutting and shaping the timbers, gathering the boards and the nails. Then he invited his neighbors, and they all came, sometimes dozens of men, for a day of communal labor. Working together, they could raise the frame of a barn in a single day, a feat that would have taken the farmer alone weeks or months to accomplish. A barn raising was also a social event. While the men worked, the women prepared an enormous meal. Children played. There was laughter and storytelling, and sometimes a fiddle and dancing in the evening. It was a celebration of community, of mutual aid, of the simple, powerful idea that we are stronger together than alone. As the night grows quiet, and the thoughts of town and church and community drift through our minds, let us rest for a moment. Let us breathe. Let us feel the calm of this evening, the peace of this farmhouse, the warmth of this fire. And then, when we are ready, let us explore a few more aspects of this life. We have spent our day in the heat of summer, but the life of the farm was shaped by all 4 seasons, each one bringing its own tasks, its own challenges, its own beauty. Let us take a brief, gentle tour through the year and see how the rhythms of the farm changed with the turning of the earth. Spring came slowly to the farmlands of America. It announced itself not with a sudden burst of warmth, but with a gradual softening, a melting, a thawing. The snow, if there had been snow, began to recede, revealing the brown, wet, bare earth beneath. The ice on the creek cracked and broke apart, carried away by the rising water. The first green shoots appeared in the fields and the woods, tiny and tentative, pushing up through the cold soil. Spring was the season of ploughing and planting, of intense, urgent labour. The soil had to be turned, the fields had to be prepared, and the seeds had to go into the ground at just the right time, not too early, when a late frost could kill the tender seedlings, and not too late, when the growing season would be too short for the crops to mature. Farmers watched the weather obsessively, looking for signs. When the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear, plant the corn. That was a common piece of folk wisdom, a simple but surprisingly reliable guide to planting time. The spring ploughing was grueling work, as we have already discussed. But there was also an exhilaration to it, a sense of renewal and beginning. After the long, cold, quiet months of winter, the farm was coming alive again. The animals were turned out to pasture, frisky and eager after being cooped up in the barn. The garden was planted, the seeds going into the warm, moist earth with a sense of hope and anticipation. The whole world seemed to be stretching and yawning and waking up, and the farmer woke with it. Summer, as we have seen, was the season of cultivation and haying, of long, hot days and constant labour. The crops grew, the weeds grew, the grass grew, and the farmer worked to keep it all in order. Summer was also the season of storms, fierce thunderstorms that swept across the plains with terrifying speed, bringing hail and wind and sometimes tornadoes. A bad storm could flatten a field of corn in minutes, destroying an entire year's work in a single violent hour. Farmers feared storms more than almost anything else, and they watched the sky with a constant, anxious vigilance. But summer also had its pleasures. The long, warm evenings, the swimming hole in the creek, where the children splashed and played on Sunday afternoons. The taste of the first ripe tomato from the garden, warm from the sun, bursting with flavour. The fields of wildflowers in the meadow, goldenrod and black-eyed Susan and Queen Anne's lace swaying in the breeze. Summer on the farm could be brutally hard, but it could also be achingly beautiful. Autumn was the great climax of the farming year, the season of harvest. This was when the long months of labour came to fruition, when the fruits of the earth were gathered in and stored away. The corn was picked, the wheat was cut and threshed, the hay was stacked in the barn. The garden produced its final, abundant yield, pumpkins and squash and late beans and the last of the tomatoes. Apples were picked from the orchard trees, pressed into cider, dried into slices, or stored in the cellar for winter eating. The autumn was also the season of butchering. As the weather turned cold, it was time to slaughter the hogs and the cattle that had been fattened all summer. This was a necessary but sombre task, one that the farmer did not take lightly. The animals had been in his care for months, and there was a gravity to the act of ending their lives, but it was essential. Without preserved meat, the family would have no protein through the winter. Hog butchering was often a communal event, like barn raising, with neighbours helping each other and sharing the work. The hogs were killed quickly and humanely, then scalded in large vats of boiling water to loosen the hair, which was scraped off. The carcasses were hung and butchered, every part of the animal used. Hams and shoulders were salted and smoked. Bacon was cured. Sausage was ground and stuffed into casings. Lard was rendered from the fat, a pure, white, essential cooking ingredient. Even the head was used, cooked into head cheese, a kind of pressed meat terrine. The intestines were cleaned and used as sausage casings. The bladder was inflated and dried, sometimes given to the children as a ball to play with. It was hard, messy, bloody work, but it was done with a practical efficiency that reflected the farmer's deep respect for the animal and his determination to waste nothing. By the time the butchering was done, the cellar and the smokehouse were full, and the family had enough meat to last through the winter. As autumn deepened, the leaves turned colour, the maples blazing red and orange, the oaks turning bronze and gold. The air grew crisp and cool, the mornings touched with frost. The harvest was in, the fields were bare, and there was a feeling of completion, of a job well done. The land was preparing for its winter rest, and the farmer was preparing too. Winter was the quiet season, the slow season. The fields were dormant, covered with snow or lying bare and brown under a grey sky. The animals were in the barn, fed on hay and grain. The days were short and cold, the nights long and dark. But winter was not a time of idleness. There was always work to be done, even if it was not the intense, physical labour of the growing season. Thomas spent the winter months repairing tools, mending harnesses, sharpening axes and ploughs. He cut and hauled firewood, an enormous task that consumed many days. He might do some hunting, going out with his rifle into the snowy woods, looking for deer or wild turkeys to supplement the family's food supply. He cleared brush, maintained the fences, and planned for the coming spring. Mary spent the winter months spinning, weaving, sewing and knitting. She made clothing for the family, quilts for the beds, rag rugs for the floors. She knitted socks and mittens and scarves, her needles clicking steadily by the fire. She processed the preserved foods, turning the raw materials of autumn into the meals of winter, cooking dried beans, baking pies from stored apples, frying salt pork and cornmeal mush. Winter was also the time for socialising, for visiting neighbours, for attending church socials and community gatherings. There were dances held in barns or in the homes of wealthier neighbours, with a fiddler playing lively tunes and the whole community stomping and clapping and laughing. There were quilting bees, where the women gathered to stitch together a quilt, sharing gossip and stories and cups of tea while their needles flew. There were husking bees, gatherings where neighbours came together to husk corn, turning a tedious chore into a social event with food and music. And there were quiet evenings at home like the one we have already witnessed, with the family gathered around the fire, reading and sewing and talking and simply being together. These winter evenings were long, sometimes stretching from 5 in the afternoon to 9 at night, 4 hours of darkness before bedtime. They could be boring, especially for the children, but they could also be cosy and warm and deeply peaceful. And then, slowly, imperceptibly, winter began to loosen its grip. The days grew a fraction longer. The sun climbed a fraction higher. A warm breeze blew from the south, carrying the scent of wet earth and growing things. And the cycle began again. Ploughing, planting, growing, harvesting. The endless, beautiful, demanding rhythm of life on the land. Let us take a moment now to look more closely at the physical world of the farm family. The things they wore, the things they owned, the objects that filled their daily lives. There is a fascination in the details, in the small, concrete things that make a life real and tangible. Clothing on the farm was simple, sturdy, and practical. Fashion was a concept that belonged to the cities, to the world of the wealthy and the leisured. On the farm, clothes served one purpose: to protect the body from the elements and allow the wearer to work. Thomas wore, on a typical workday, a shirt of coarse cotton or linen, usually white or a light colour, with long sleeves and a simple collar. Over the shirt, he might wear a vest, a sleeveless garment that provided an extra layer of warmth. His trousers were made of heavy cotton or wool, durable enough to withstand the rigours of farm work. They were held up by suspenders, which were strips of fabric or leather that went over the shoulders and buttoned to the waistband of the trousers. Belts were less common than suspenders in this era. On his feet, Thomas wore heavy leather boots, handmade by a local cobbler or purchased at the general store. These boots were sturdy and tough, with thick soles and high tops that came up above the ankle. They were not comfortable by our standards. They were stiff and heavy and had no arch support, but they protected the feet from the hazards of the farm, sharp stones, thorns, animal hooves, and the constant damp of the fields. On his head, Thomas wore a hat. The hat was essential, a piece of equipment as important as any tool. It shielded the face and neck from the sun, kept the rain off, and provided a measure of warmth in cold weather. It might be a wide-brimmed straw hat in summer, light and airy, or a felt hat in cooler weather, soft and warm. Thomas would not dream of going outside without his hat. It was simply part of him, as much as his hands or his feet. Mary's clothing was equally practical but slightly more varied. Her everyday dress was a simple garment, cut from cotton or linen, with a fitted bodice, a full skirt that fell to her ankles, and long sleeves. The fabric was usually a plain colour or a simple print, nothing fancy. Over the dress, she wore her apron, which was large enough to cover her front from chest to knees. The apron protected the dress and also served as a handy carrying device. Mary would use her apron to gather eggs, carry vegetables from the garden, wipe her hands, and even carry a sleepy child. As our quiet journey through an ordinary American farm in 1850 comes to an end, take one last slow look around. The evening air has cooled, the last rays of sunlight have slipped behind the trees, and the farmhouse windows glow softly with the warmth of the fire inside. The horses rest peacefully in the barn. The chickens have settled onto their roosts. Somewhere in the distance, a single owl begins its nightly call, while the stars quietly reclaim the sky. Today, we didn't witness a famous battle, meet a great president, or stand at the center of a historic event. Instead, we shared something just as important, the quiet, ordinary life of the families who built a nation through patience, perseverance, and countless small acts of hard work. Their names may never have appeared in history books, but their hands planted the fields, raised the children, built the homes, and laid the foundation for generations that followed. Their lives remind us that history is not only shaped by extraordinary people, but also by ordinary people who simply kept going, one sunrise after another. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps carry with you the peaceful rhythm of that old farmhouse, the crackling fire, the gentle creak of wooden floors, the soft rustle of cornfields in the evening breeze, the comforting knowledge that for one quiet day, everything that truly mattered was family, honest work, and the promise of another sunrise. Thank you for spending this peaceful journey through history with me tonight. If you enjoyed this relaxing historical story, consider joining me again for another gentle journey into the past, where we'll quietly explore another forgotten place, another remarkable time, and another chapter of everyday life that shaped the world we know today. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and may your dreams be as calm and timeless as this peaceful American farm beneath the stars. Good night.